We hunted their ships day and night, and found them every time. From the bridge of PT 492, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison watched the phosphorescent wake of his torpedo boat cut through the midnight waters of Lake Gulf. October 1944. The air still tasted of cordite and burning oil from the greatest naval battle in history, fought just days before in these very waters. But the Battle of Lake Gulf was only the beginning. What followed would be a systematic destruction of Japanese naval power in the Philippines, unlike anything the world had ever seen. "Contact bearing 270, range 4,000 yards, whispered radioman First Class Tommy Chen, his voice barely audible above the muffled rumble of our Packard engines. Through his binoculars, Morrison could make out the distinctive silhouette of a Japanese destroyer escort leading what appeared to be a small convoy hugging the lake coastline. 3, maybe 4 cargo vessels, desperate to resupply the beleaguered Japanese garrison at Ormuz. They were running without lights, of course, thinking the darkness would protect them. They were wrong. "All ahead flank," Morrison ordered quietly. "Torpedo tubes 1 and 2, prepare to fire." The PT boat surged forward, her 3 engines roaring to life as she accelerated to over 40 knots. Behind them, PT 486 and PT 521 followed in perfect formation, their own torpedo tubes loaded and ready. This was how it had been for weeks now. American naval forces had turned the waters around the Philippines into a killing ground for Japanese shipping. The destruction had begun even before MacArthur's boots touched the beaches of Leyte. Task Force 38, the fast carrier force under Admiral Halsey, had swept down from the north like an avenging angel, their dive bombers and torpedo planes finding Japanese convoys wherever they tried to hide. In a single day in early October, carrier aircraft that sunk or damaged over 30 vessels attempting to reinforce the Philippines. The pattern was always the same. Radar would pick up the enemy formations, fighters would clear the skies of any Japanese air cover, and then the bombers would methodically work their way through the convoy from largest to smallest vessel. But it was the nights that truly belonged to the Americans. Torpedoes running straight and normal, reported Torpedoman Second Class Mike O'Brien from his position at the tubes. Morrison counted the seconds in his head, 10, 20, 30. At this range, impact should come in just under 2 minutes. Through his glasses, he could see the enemy destroyer had finally spotted them, frantically signaling with her searchlight as she began to turn. Too late. The first torpedo struck the destroyer amidships with a brilliant flash that lit up the entire convoy. The explosion was so violent it lifted the 1,200-ton vessel completely out of the water before she broke in half and disappeared beneath the waves in less than 30 seconds. The second torpedo found one of the cargo ships, a converted passenger liner pressed into service as a troop transport. The blast tore through her hull just below the waterline, and Morrison could hear the screams of drowning soldiers carried across the water. "All tubes, fire at will," he commanded as the PT boats closed to point-blank range. The remaining Japanese vessels scattered like frightened sheep, but there was nowhere to run. American destroyers from Task Force 77 appeared on the horizon, their 5-inch guns already finding the range. Within 20 minutes, the entire convoy had been eliminated, 4 vessels sent to the bottom with over 2,000 Japanese troops who would never reach their positions defending Leyte. This was the reality of the Philippines campaign by late 1944. American naval supremacy was so complete that Japanese ships could barely leave port without being detected and destroyed. The combined fleet, once the terror of the Pacific, had been reduced to desperate night runs and kamikaze tactics. Every convoy that attempted to resupply or reinforce the Philippines faced overwhelming odds, and most never completed their missions. The statistics were staggering. Between October 1944 and February 1945, during the Leyte and Mindoro operations, American naval and air forces sank or damaged over 500 Japanese vessels of all types. More than 100 of these were significant warships or large cargo vessels representing critical losses to Japan's already depleted merchant marine. The Japanese had entered the war with approximately 6 million tons of merchant shipping. By early 1945, less than 1.5 million tons remained afloat, and most of that was trapped in Japanese home waters, unable to venture into the submarine-infested sea lanes. From his cockpit 15,000 feet above the sea beyond sea, Lieutenant Bobby "Hawk" Harrison of VB-15 off the carrier USS Essex could see the entire scope of American naval dominance spread out below him. It was January 1945, and his squadron was conducting what had become routine, a search and destroy mission against any Japanese shipping foolish enough to venture into Philippine waters during daylight hours. Tally-ho! Convoy bearing 090, Angel's Deck, crackled over the radio from Lieutenant Commander Pete "Sky" Williams, the squadron leader. Harrison banked his SB-2C Helderberg to the right and spotted them immediately, 5 Japanese vessels making a desperate daylight run toward Mindoro, probably carrying ammunition and supplies for the garrison that was even now being overwhelmed by American ground forces. The Japanese had learned to fear American carrier aircraft with good reason. Since the beginning of the Philippines campaign, Task Force 38's air groups had perfected the art of anti-shipping strikes. The tactics were brutally effective. Fighters would sweep ahead to eliminate any Japanese air cover. Then the dive bombers and torpedo planes would attack in coordinated waves that no convoy could survive. This is Sky Leader. Execute Attack Plan Charlie. Fighters, clear the deck. Torpedo planes, take the escorts. Dive bombers, work over those cargo ships. Let's make this quick and clean. Harrison pushed his Helderberg into a steep dive, the altimeter unwinding rapidly as he plummeted toward a large cargo vessel that intelligence had identified as a converted passenger liner. These ships were priority targets. They could carry up to 3,000 troops or massive quantities of supplies that the Japans desperately needed to continue their defense of the Philippines. At 2,000 feet, he pulled the release handle. The 1,000-pound bomb dropped away cleanly, and Harrison hauled back on the stick, pulling out of the dive just above the waves. Behind him, the bomb struck the target amidships with devastating effect. The explosion tore through the ship's hull and superstructure, igniting ammunition stores that had been hastily loaded in some Japanese port. Secondary explosions ripped the vessel apart, and she began to settle by the stern as her back broke. Around him, the other aircraft were methodically destroying the rest of the convoy. TBM Avengers from the torpedo squadrons put their fish into the 2 destroyer escorts, both of which disappeared in towering columns of smoke and steam. The remaining cargo ships fell victim to more dive bombers, each one torn apart by 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs that no merchant vessel could withstand. Within 15 minutes, the entire convoy had been eliminated. 5 ships, approximately 2,500 tons of critical supplies, and over 1,800 Japanese personnel sent to the bottom. It was a typical result for American airstrikes during this period of the war. "That's a clean sweep, gentlemen," came Williams' voice over the radio. "Form up on me. We'll make one more sweep toward Bataan before heading home." As they climbed back to altitude, Harrison reflected on how completely the situation had changed since the dark days of 1942. Then it had been American convoys running a gauntlet of Japanese submarines and aircraft. Now the tables were utterly reversed. Japanese shipping moved only at night, and even then faced destruction from American PT boats, destroyers, and submarines. During daylight hours, any Japanese vessel caught in the open was doomed. The numbers told the story of American naval dominance. In the 6 months between the landings at Leyte and the fall of Manila, American forces sank 127 Japanese warships of destroyer size or larger, including 2 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers, 7 heavy cruisers, and 23 destroyers. The merchant marine losses were even more catastrophic. Over 300 cargo vessels, tankers, and transports sent to the bottom, representing more than 800,000 tons of desperately needed shipping. Perhaps more importantly, these losses represented the complete collapse of Japan's ability to conduct maritime logistics. The Japanese army in the Philippines was effectively cut off from resupply, forced to fight with whatever ammunition and equipment they had on hand when the Americans landed. Entire divisions withered away not from battle casualties, but from malnutrition and disease as medical supplies and food failed to reach them. The human cost was staggering. Conservative estimates suggested that over 50,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors died not in combat, but as passengers aboard the vessels sunk by American forces during the Philippines campaign. These were troops desperately needed for the defense of the home islands, lost instead to the sharks and depths of the Philippine Sea. Back aboard PT-492, Morrison was reviewing the intelligence reports that painted an increasingly grim picture for Japanese naval operations. It was February 1945, and his squadron had just returned from another successful patrol in the waters between Luzon and Mindoro. In 3 nights of operations, they had intercepted and destroyed 2 separate Japanese convoys, sinking 8 vessels without loss. "Sir, you need to see this," said Lieutenant Junior Grade Paul Stevens, the boat's intelligence officer, as he handed Morrison the latest dispatch from 7th Fleet Headquarters. "Japanese radio intercepts indicate they're calling off most convoy operations to the Philippines. They simply can't sustain losses." Morrison studied the report with satisfaction. The statistics were overwhelming. In just 4 months of operations, American naval forces had reduced Japanese shipping in Philippine waters by over 90%. What had once been a steady stream of reinforcements and supplies had been reduced to a trickle of desperate night runs that rarely succeeded. The strategic implications were enormous. Cut off from resupply, Japanese forces throughout the Philippines were beginning to collapse. On late, the once formidable 35th Army had been reduced to scattered bands of starving soldiers hiding in the mountains. The defense of Luzon, which Japanese planners had hoped would delay the Americans for months, was crumbling as ammunition ran out and reinforcements failed to arrive. "The intelligence boys estimate we've sunk over 60% of all Japanese merchant tonnage that attempted to reach the Philippines," Stevens continued. "That's not counting the warships. Between our boats, the destroyers, submarines, and carrier aircraft, we've essentially eliminated organized Japanese naval presence in these waters." This was the reality of American naval power by early 1945. The vast industrial capacity of the United States had produced a fleet so large and technologically advanced that it could maintain simultaneous operations across the entire Pacific. While Task Force 58 prepared for the assault on Iwo Jima, Task Force 38 continued to pound Japanese positions throughout the South China Sea. PT boat squadrons, destroyer divisions, and submarine wolf packs operated with impunity in waters that had once been considered Japanese lakes. The technological advantages were as important as the numerical ones. American radar could detect Japanese surface vessels at ranges exceeding 20 miles, while Japanese ships remained essentially blind beyond visual distance. American aircraft carried sophisticated navigation equipment that allowed them to find and attack targets in any weather, day or night. Most critically, American intelligence services had broken Japanese naval codes, meaning that convoy routes and schedules were often known in advance. "Signal from Comdesren 56, reported the radio man. "Japanese convoy estimated 8 vessels departed Manila 2 hours ago, heading south toward Mindoro. All available units are ordered to intercept." Morrison felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. This would be one of the larger convoys they had encountered, probably a final desperate attempt to evacuate Japanese personnel from Luzon before the Americans completed their conquest of the island. These evacuation runs had become increasingly common as Japanese commanders realized their positions were hopeless. "All ahead flank. Signal PT-486 and PT-521 to form attack formation. We'll coordinate with the destroyers from Task Group 77.4. The 3 PT boats surged forward into the darkness, their crews checking weapons and equipment with the practiced efficiency of veterans. Behind them, 4 American destroyers were converging on the same intercept point, their 5-inch guns loaded with high explosive shells. The Japanese convoy never had a chance. Detected by radar at 18 miles, tracked by multiple surface units, and with their route predictable from intercepted radio messages, they sailed into what was effectively an ambush. The engagement lasted less than an hour. When dawn broke over Mindoro Strait, 8 Japanese vessels rested on the bottom, along with nearly 4,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors who would never see their homeland again. It was a microcosm of the entire Philippines campaign. Superior American technology, overwhelming numerical advantages, and complete command of the sea had turned every Japanese attempt at naval operations into a death sentence. The proud Imperial Navy that had struck Pearl Harbor and conquered half the Pacific had been reduced to scattered remnants hiding in remote anchorages, venturing out only for desperate missions that usually ended in annihilation. From the flight deck of USS Intrepid, Lieutenant Commander James Iron Mackenzie watched the pre-dawn launch of what would be one of the final major airstrikes against Japanese shipping in Philippine waters. It was March 1945, and intelligence indicated that the Japanese were attempting to evacuate their remaining forces from the southern Philippines in a series of high-speed destroyer runs. As Air Group Commander, Mackenzie had overseen dozens of anti-shipping strikes during the Philippines campaign. His pilots had become experts at finding and destroying Japanese vessels, developing tactics and techniques that had proven devastatingly effective. The results spoke for themselves. VF-18, VB-18, and VT-18 had been credited with sinking or damaging over 40 Japanese vessels, including 3 destroyers, 2 light cruisers, and numerous cargo ships and transports. Launch complete, CAG, reported Their Operations Officer. 36 aircraft airborne. Weather is clear, visibility unlimited. Should be ideal hunting conditions. Mackenzie nodded as he climbed into his F-6F Hellcat. The mission profile was familiar: sweep south toward the Sulu Sea, locate any Japanese shipping and destroy it. By this point in the war, such missions were almost routine. Japanese air defenses in the Philippines had been virtually eliminated, and their surface vessels rarely carried significant anti-aircraft armament. As the strike group formed up and headed south, Mackenzie reflected on how completely the naval war in the Pacific had been transformed. In 1942, a single Japanese aircraft carrier could terrorize Allied shipping across thousands of square miles of ocean. Now, American task forces operated with virtual impunity, their aircraft ranging across the entire Western Pacific in search of targets. Contact, bearing 180, range 15 miles, came the report from Lieutenant Bobby Chen, leading the scout section. Looks like 4 destroyers in column formation, making high speed toward Borneo. Mackenzie felt a surge of satisfaction. These were probably the remnants of a Japanese destroyer division, attempting to evacuate key personnel from the Philippines before the Americans completed their conquest. Such high-speed runs had become Japan's preferred method for moving critical personnel and equipment, but they were still vulnerable to carrier aircraft. This is CAG. All sections, execute attack plan Baker. Fighters will suppress flak, torpedo planes take the lead destroyer, dive bombers work over the trailing units. Let's make this count. The attack developed with textbook precision. The Hellcats swept down first there, 50 caliber machine guns raking the destroyer's anti-aircraft positions and superstructure. The Japanese vessels scattered, turning sharply and increasing speed, but they were caught in open water with nowhere to hide. The TBM Avengers came in low and fast, their torpedoes aimed at the leading destroyer. 2 fish struck home, the explosions breaking the 2,100-ton warship's back and sending her to the bottom in less than 3 minutes. The SB-2C Helldivers followed, their 1,000-pound bombs finding targets among the remaining destroyers. Within 20 minutes, all 4 Japanese destroyers had been sunk or fatally damaged. Over 1,200 Japanese naval personnel, including some of the most experienced officers and petty officers remaining in the Imperial Navy, went down with their ships. It was a devastating blow to an already crippled service. As the American aircraft formed up for the return flight to their carriers, Mackenzie surveyed the scene of destruction below. 4 columns of smoke marked the graves of the Japanese destroyers, while oil slicks and debris fields spread across several square miles of ocean. There were no survivors visible. At this distance from any friendly port, rescue was impossible. The strategic impact of such losses went far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Japan's Navy had entered the war with approximately 350,000 trained personnel. By early 1945, battle casualties, shipwrecks, and the collapse of the training system had reduced this to fewer than 200,000 effectives. Every ship sunk, every trained sailor lost, brought the Imperial Navy closer to complete collapse. The merchant marine losses were even more critical. Japan's island empire depended absolutely on seaborne trade for survival. Oil from the Dutch East Indies, rice from Indochina, iron ore from the Philippines. All of this had to move by ship. By destroying over 60% of Japan's merchant tonnage during the Philippines campaign, American forces had effectively severed the economic arteries that kept the Japanese war machine functioning. The human dimension of this naval campaign was staggering. Conservative estimates suggested that over 100,000 Japanese military personnel died as passengers aboard vessel SANK during the Philippines operations. These were not combat deaths in the traditional sense, but the result of Japan's complete inability to protect its sea lanes from American attack. For the Americans, the Philippines campaign represented the culmination of 3 years of naval expansion and tactical development. The fleet that MacArthur and Nimitz deployed in 1944 was qualitatively and quantitatively superior to any naval force in history. Fast carriers, modern battleships, sophisticated radar and communications equipment, and above all, superbly trained crews had created a military instrument capable of projecting power across the entire Pacific simultaneously. The PT boat squadrons alone had sunk or damaged over 150 Japanese vessels during the Philippines campaign, from major warships to small cargo craft. Operating primarily at night, these fast, heavily armed boats had turned the coastal waters around every major Philippine island into a death trap for Japanese shipping. Their success rate was extraordinary. Over 80% of all Japanese vessels encountered by PT boats were either sunk or damaged beyond repair. Morrison's PT-492 had accounted for 12 confirmed kills during 5 months of operations, including 2 destroyers, a light cruiser, and 9 cargo vessels. His crew had become experts at night fighting, using radar and superior speed to achieve tactical surprise against an enemy that was increasingly demoralized and poorly equipped. "That's the last of them," reported Stevens as he reviewed the final intelligence reports from the Philippines. Japanese radio traffic indicates they're abandoning all attempts at large-scale naval operations in this theater. What's left of their fleet is being recalled to defend the home islands. It was April 1945, and the Philippines campaign was effectively over. American forces controlled every major port, every significant airfield, and virtually every mile of coastline. The Japanese 14th Area Army, once 350,000 strong, had been reduced to scattered remnants hiding in remote mountain valleys. Cut off from resupply by the systematic destruction of their supporting naval forces, they posed no significant threat to American operations. The broader strategic implications were enormous. With the Philippines secured, American forces could now project power directly toward the Japanese home islands. The next targets, Iwo Jima and Okinawa, would bring American bombers within range of Japan's industrial centers. More importantly, the systematic destruction of Japanese naval power in the Philippines had eliminated any possibility of effective resistance to these future operations. The statistics were overwhelming. During the 6-month Philippines campaign, American naval forces had sunk 2 Japanese battleships, 4 aircraft carriers, 7 heavy cruisers, 12 light cruisers, 23 destroyers, 47 destroyer escorts, and over 300 merchant vessels. This represented approximately 40% of all remaining Japanese naval tonnage and an even higher percentage of trained naval personnel. Perhaps more significantly, these losses had been achieved at minimal cost to American forces. Total American naval losses during the Philippines campaign amounted to 1 escort carrier, 3 destroyers, 6 destroyer escorts, and 14 PT boats, a casualty ratio of approximately 20, 1 in favor of the Americans. From the bridge of USS New Jersey, Admiral William Bull Halsey surveyed the anchorage at Ulithi Atoll, where the remnants of Task Force 38 were reprovisioning for the next phase of operations. The site never failed to impress him. Dozens of fleet carriers, fast battleships, cruisers, and destroyers representing the most powerful naval force ever assembled. Admiral, the final tally from Philippines operations, reported his chief of staff, Captain Robert Carney, handing over a thick folder of reports. Our forces sank or damaged 847 Japanese vessels of all types, including 127 major warships. Enemy personnel casualties are estimated at over 150,000, including approximately 75,000 naval personnel. Halsey studied the figures with grim satisfaction. These numbers represented the complete collapse of Japanese naval power in the Southwest Pacific. What had begun as a campaign to liberate the Philippines had become a systematic destruction of Japan's ability to conduct naval warfare. "What's the status of Japanese fleet units remaining in the theater?" he asked. "Minimal, sir. Intelligence estimates fewer than 30 operational warships of destroyer size or larger remain in Philippine waters, and most of those are trapped in ports without fuel or ammunition. Their merchant marine has been virtually eliminated. Fewer than 50 operational cargo vessels remain, and those are confined to short runs between Japanese-held ports." The transformation was complete. In less than 6 months, American naval forces had turned the Philippines from a Japanese stronghold into an American lake. The cost in Japanese shipping, trained personnel, and strategic resources had been catastrophic. More importantly, it had eliminated Japan's ability to conduct defensive operations on the scale originally envisioned by their military planners. The human cost of this naval campaign extended far beyond military casualties. The systematic destruction of Japanese merchant shipping had severed the economic links between Japan's scattered island garrisons and the home islands. Throughout the Philippines, Japanese forces were literally starving as supply ships failed to arrive. Medical supplies, ammunition, fuel, and food became increasingly scarce, leading to the collapse of organized resistance in many areas. For the Americans, the Philippines campaign had validated the strategic concept of naval supremacy through overwhelming force. The combination of fast carriers, modern battleships, efficient logistics, and superior technology had created a military instrument capable of achieving decisive results against any opponent. The lessons learned would prove invaluable in the final campaigns against Iwo Jima and Okinawa. As Mackenzie prepared for his final flight over Philippine waters, he reflected on the magnitude of what had been accomplished. American naval aviation had evolved from the desperate defenders of 1942 into the most effective anti-shipping force in military history. The pilots and aircrew of Task Force 38 had perfected techniques for finding and destroying enemy vessels that would influence naval warfare for decades to come. The strategic bombing campaign against Japanese shipping had been equally devastating. Operating from newly captured bases throughout the Philippines, American bombers had systematically hunted down every Japanese vessel that attempted to operate in the South China Sea. The combination of carrier aviation, land-based bombers, surface ships, and submarines had created an interlocking network of destruction that no enemy convoy could survive. "Final mission," CAG reported his wingman as they formed up for takeoff. "Intelligence says there might be a few Japanese patrol boats trying to evacuate personnel from Mindanao. Probably the last enemy shipping we'll see in these waters." As they lifted off from Intrepid's flight deck, Mackenzie looked down at the vast American fleet spread across the horizon. Hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of trained personnel. It represented the culmination of American industrial and military power. More importantly, it represented the complete mastery of the seas that had once been dominated by the rising sun. The final engagement was anticlimactic. 3 small Japanese patrol boats, desperately overloaded with evacuating personnel, were quickly located and destroyed by rocket and machine gun fire. There were no survivors. It was a fitting end to a campaign that had seen the systematic elimination of Japanese naval power throughout the Philippines. As the American aircraft formed up for their return to the carriers, the Philippine Sea stretched out below them, empty of enemy vessels for the first time since December 1941. The rising sun had set on Japanese naval power in the Southwest Pacific, replaced by the stars and stripes flying from the mastheads of the most powerful fleet in history. The statistics were staggering, but they told only part of the story. Behind every ship sunk, every convoy destroyed, every naval engagement won, lay months of training, planning, and coordination that had transformed the United States Navy from a peacetime force into the dominant naval power in the world. The Philippines campaign had been the culmination of this transformation, demonstrating American naval supremacy in the most decisive terms possible. "We had hunted their ships day and night, and found them every time. In the end, it had been no contest at all. The noose had closed around the Philippines, and with it, around the throat of the Japanese Empire itself. The sea lanes that had once carried the commerce of the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere now lay empty, patrolled by American ships and aircraft that had swept their enemies from the face of the waters. The battle for the Philippines was over. The war itself would continue for a few more months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. American naval supremacy had been established beyond question, and with it, the foundation for victory in the Pacific had been laid. Over 100 Japanese ships lay on the bottom of the Philippine Sea, silent testimony to the price of challenging American naval power at its zenith.